Doom is, on paper, a series I should not enjoy nearly as much as I do. I'm typically a very narrative-focused gamer, and while Doom has some interesting lore, it's not exactly a series most players would describe as lore-heavy. On the contrary, the lore is basically a coat of paint put on an exterior of gratuitous violence and gore. I definitely want a good story with most of my games, but sometimes I just want to rip and tear. Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal pretty much perfected that though, so where was id gonna go from here? Well, apparently backwards, technically. Doom: The Dark Ages is a prequel to the recent Doom games. It takes place after Doom, Doom 2, and Doom 64. Doom 3 is a non-canon reimagining of the original Doom, but it takes place before Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, and Doom Eternal's The Ancient Gods DLC. Doom Guy, or Doom Slayer as he is typically called nowadays, voluntarily stayed in Hell fighting demons at the end of Doom 64, and he's found by the UAC trapped in a sarcophagus at the start of Doom 2016. Dark Ages depicts the war between Hell and Argent D'Nur that took place between those two events. Dark Ages seems to be a rather divisive game amongst fans of the series. Some praise it as the best Doom experience yet, while others pan it as the worst game in the series since Doom 3. I fall somewhere in the middle. I enjoyed it more than Doom Eternal, but it definitely fell short of Doom 2016 in my opinion. The split in opinion seems to come down largely to the flow of the game. It's an undeniably slower gameplay style than Doom 2016. That said though, it's a consistent flow, whereas Doom Eternal would flow like 2016 for about 45 minutes, and then grind to a screeching halt when you encountered one of those god-awful marauders. Dark Ages does have a couple of enemies that can shield themselves from all attacks temporarily, but you need to either kill enough smaller demons to quote-unquote break morale, or parry its attacks back at it to drop its shield, depending on what the specific enemy is. Either way, that doesn't feel like a break in the gameplay the way that Eternal's Marauders did, and in my book, that alone puts it above Eternal. As far as performance goes, it seemed to run at a flawless 60 frames per second in my gameplay, and according to Digital Foundry, it seems to run at a dynamic 1440p, with the occasional drop down to 1080p for especially busy fights. Resolution isn't everything anymore when it comes to visual quality, though. The power of the Series X is leveraged to deliver that rock-solid frame rate and respectable resolution alongside ray tracing, some impressively detailed textures, and fantastic lighting effects that perfectly set the dark, pseudo-gothic tone that creates a sort of medieval version of a cyberpunk aesthetic. I admittedly have not played on PC with my 4090 GPU, or on PS5 yet, let alone PS5 Pro, which I don't even own, #BrokeTeacherProblems, but I can't imagine PS5 looks or runs much worse than Series X, and PC, well, these days PC runs everything better than consoles, unless it's a port for PlayStation. If nothing else, Doom: The Dark Ages art design is pretty unique, at least with the games I've played. As I've mentioned before, the gameplay flow of Dark Ages is a lot slower than that of 2016. Doom 2016 was a very acrobatic-feeling game, wherein you practically flew through the environment, raining death and carnage down on your enemies. Dark Ages, on the other hand, has you act more akin to a modern main battle tank. You can move fast when you need to, but you're mainly a steadily progressing wall of carnage, standing your ground and killing all that lies before you, rather than zipping around like Peter Parker did a pound of meth. I personally prefer 2016's faster-paced combat, but that is absolutely a personal preference and not a statement on quality. I felt Dark Ages' slower pace to be every bit as masterfully executed as 2016's frantic pace was. Dark Ages did add in some awesome new combat segments though. The dragon-mounted combat from the Ancient Gods is back and refined to a smoothness that made it feel almost like Star Wars Squadrons. Better than that though is the introduction of a giant robot. You can pilot a huge mech and either punch demons to death or explode them with enormous shoulder-mounted cannons. I may prefer the general combat feel of 2016, but the mech combat in Dark Ages is peak. It's also a supremely approachable game, with an array of deeply customizable difficulty options so that you can tailor the game's difficulty, and the reason for that difficulty, exactly to your wishes. Unfortunately, there is one major factor that keeps Dark Ages from getting a near-perfect score from me, and that's the soundtrack. Since the very first Doom game, over 30 years ago, Doom's epic metal soundtrack has been a staple, and Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal were absolute masterpiece examples of video game soundtrack design. The soundtrack in Dark Ages isn't bad per se, but it's a bit bland. It's like you go see Slipknot live, and then the next day you go see Ice Nine Kills live, and then you go see your uncle's Metallica cover band live. They may be very talented musicians, and it might be a great cover band, but it's never going to hold a candle to legit metal superstar bands. And that's how Dark Ages soundtrack is compared next to Doom 2016's and Doom Eternal's soundtracks. It's a perfectly fine metal soundtrack, but it's just fine. And fine isn't good enough when you're coming off the heels of 2 consecutive perfect soundtracks. At least as far as my personal friends go, that seems to be the single biggest complaint about Dark Ages. The soundtrack is just such a disappointment after the standards set by 2016 and Eternal. Doom: The Dark Ages is a fantastic game. Hell, it's an amazing game. The soundtrack, honestly, is the only thing holding it back from a perfect rating for me. Normally, that alone wouldn't be enough to knock an otherwise incredible gameplay down from an S to an A, but this is Doom we're talking about. There are 3 things that people think of when they think of Doom: a shotgun, a chainsaw, and a badass metal soundtrack. Okay, so Dark Ages technically did replace the chainsaw with a flail, but the ultra-violence with the melee is still there. The soundtrack, though, is just painfully mid for a game in the Doom franchise. Still, though, I do consider this an absolute must-play for fans of first-person shooters. You've got options with it available on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X or Series S, and hopefully you've got one of those platforms lying around. I'm also crossing my fingers for a Switch 2 port down the line, given how well Panic Button got Doom Eternal running on the original Switch. My rating for Doom: The Dark Ages on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 is an A.